Preparing.
Recording is on.
Whoa.
I don't like it either.
That was wild.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual discussion of Thomas Calder's The Wind Under the Door. We have Thomas here with us today. As a reminder, you can purchase this book on our website at orcabooks.com. We'll put a link in the chat box on the left of the screen. So it's at the bottom. You press that speech bubble, and then it's at the very top of the chat. Thomas Calder earned his MFA in creative writing from the University of Houston. His work has appeared in Gulf Coast, Miracle Monocle, The Collagist, and elsewhere. He lives in Asheville, North Carolina, with his wife, daughter, and dog. The Wind Under the Door is his debut novel. We advise to press the tile view button at the bottom of your screen to see Thomas full screen. After that, we'll be doing a Q&A. We plan to record this event, as you heard. So if you don't want to appear on video, please keep your cameras disabled. You can do this at the bottom of your screen. Also, make sure to enter your name if you'd like. Let's see. Please keep your mics muted most of the time. When it is time for questions, you can either raise your hand. There's a hand icon at the bottom you could press, and we'll call on you to unmute yourself. Or you could also ask in the chat box if you're shy. People usually prefer to do that way. Okay, Thomas, I give the floor to you.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to do these virtual readings, and it's cool to kind of be in Olympia, Washington right now. So yeah, The Wind Under the Door is my debut novel. And for those who are unfamiliar with the beautiful cover there by the talented Nirvan Jacob, it's a story about a collage artist named Ford Carson, who's kind of in a new phase of his life, and he's gearing up to host his estranged 18-year-old son who's coming to visit him from California. But in the process of getting ready to host his son, he meets this woman, Grace Burnett, who is married and coming from Houston, Texas. And they have this affair, and the story is kind of about their relationship, but also Ford's relationship with his son, his ex-wife, Emily, and Grace's relationship with her estranged husband, J.R. Burnett. And that's pretty much the story in a nutshell. What I'm going to do next, I think, is kind of dive into a reading, if that works. Sweet. All right. I'm going to read for about 7 to 8 minutes. For those of you who get anxious during readings and wonder when the author will ever stop. So it's a pretty self-contained section. This is a passage where, so part of the novel is really about Ford kind of coming to grips with the fact that his relationship with his ex-wife, Emily, is going to be changing after his son turns 18. And they might not be communicating as much. They might not have anything to do with each other after this. And this particular section is self-contained, and it's the beginning of their relationship. They got married young, and they've been divorced for 10 years when we start the novel. So this is Ford's kind of reflection on their early love and the complexities that it was. All right, so here we go. They had been each other's first, and like all firsts, they shouldn't have extended beyond high school, but they had, even after Emily moved 5 hours north to study English in Gainesville. They initially took turns visiting each other until Emily's workload impeded her travels. Ford tried convincing her to get the books on tape to listen to on her drive down the turnpike. "I'm not up here reading John Grisham novels," she informed him. "I didn't say you were. You don't respect what I do." "Yes, I do," Ford said. "You do what?" "I respect what you do. I couldn't do it." "What couldn't you do?" "Read all those books." They briefly split up that spring. Ford drank a lot and thought about dating, but held out hope that they would get back together, that what they needed was just what she'd claimed, space. Emily had other plans. Ford had met his replacement, a pretentious little bastard with a real hard-on for the word kitsch, at a party prior to their split. At the time, Ford didn't know what kitsch meant. Emily did, or at least she laughed each time Kitsch Boy said it. Eventually, Ford laughed too. This, no doubt, had been Kitsch Boy's plan all along. "What's so funny?" Kitsch Boy asked. It was late. The party was dying down. "What you said," Ford answered. "Why is it funny?" Kitsch Boy insisted. "Because it's true." "What's true?" "It's very kitsch," Ford said. "What's kitsch?" "Everything on that table." "No," Kitsch Boy said. "I mean literally. What does kitsch mean?" Ford thumbed the lip of his beer bottle. You don't know what it means. It means go fuck yourself, Ford said. Jesus, Ford, Emily whispered. Kitchboy laughed before wishing Emily a good evening. That's how he said it, too, good evening. He then looked at Ford and shook his head, offering a contemptuous huff. Ford charged him. He could still see the transformation from the smug to the terrified. Kitchboy had been raised on a promise that if you kept a certain class of friends, you could patronize and critique to your heart's content without the slightest fear of a true human response. That had always been Ford's issue with Emily's college friends. They could theorize every aspect of life, they could deconstruct and reference the esoteric, but they didn't know shit. Emily was horrified. She thought Ford had smashed his beer bottle over Kitchboy's head. In reality, Kitchboy had nicked his forehead on the doorknob as he fell back, and if there's one thing a head's good for, it's bleeding. So it bled, and Emily yelled, and another partygoer helped Kitchboy up, and Emily took him to the hospital. Ford stayed behind. The party's host insisted that he leave, but Ford had nowhere to go. He ended up sleeping on the couch. At 5 in the morning, Emily woke him. By then, he'd forgotten about the entire fracas. Forgot he was sleeping on a stranger's couch. He asked Emily what they were doing. She told him he ought to go home. Of course, Kitchboy didn't last. The summer arrived, and Emily returned to Dania. She and Ford reconciled. It was the summer of '96, but it felt like they time traveled back to their first meeting on the beach. Only they managed to stretch that feeling the entire 12 weeks. They talked about marriage and kids and the places they would go and the things they'd see and all the other stuff you say during the summer when nothing is quite as real as the fall, winter, and spring. When Emily returned to Gainesville, so too did her impatience and dissatisfaction. This time around, though, her focus broadened. It didn't apply exclusively to Ford, but to everyone, particularly herself. Nevertheless, they managed to make it to winter, then spring. Do you realize how easy we have it? She asked Ford. This became Emily's mantra throughout her sophomore year. Back then, she held a general contempt for all of life's advantages, an insistence on a world unbalanced, a world corrupt, a world completely fucked. But over time, the veneer cracked. Her outrage had little to do with the system and everything to do with herself. Emily was experiencing an existential crisis. She had decided to become a writer. But what exactly did she have to write about? What insights could the daughter of a litigator offer the world? Where did 6 years of horse camp fall into the sort of narrative she dreamt necessary to truly claim a voice? What inspiration did she have to draw from? What struggles had she faced? She never voiced her concerns outright. If anything, she projected her fears onto Ford. Don't you get scared, she asked. You literally don't know anything outside of Dania. And all that you do know has already happened. You'll be following in your dad's footsteps, even though you already know how that story goes. It's a family business. Only if you continue it, she said. It makes sense to, if you're looking for the easy way out. It'll benefit us both, he said. Emily fell silent. He knew then he was losing her again. Only this time it felt less personal. He sensed her loss. She didn't want to lose him, but it was beyond their control. This was the final day of spring break, and they both knew it was goodbye. And so they drank a proper farewell and stumbled to the beach and fucked under the pier and listened to the waves and said silly things and laughed and cried and took turns saying pretty things to help the other one stop crying. It all felt right. Ford remembered being okay with it then, knowing that it was the end, but that they would see each other again in different lives and under different circumstances, that the transition would be the hardest part, but once they got through that, all would be fine. Emily returned in May. They hadn't spoken since their farewell night. She found him inside his father's print shop. He stood behind the counter entering payments. She remained by the door, peering out its front window onto A1A. Her face reflected off the glass. At first, her focus stayed on the traffic. Then she looked toward the reflection in the window. They stared at each other through the glass. Neither moved. She must have been deciding things. The door stood 2 feet away. Ford still didn't know what gesture he made, but whatever he'd done caused her to smile. It wasn't a broad smile by any means. If anything, it was more in her eyes than her lips. And maybe it had nothing to do with Ford. Maybe it was the fact that she'd accepted the situation. Maybe it was the smile of surrender. I'm pregnant, Emily told him. And I'll end there.
Right on. All right. Thank you for sharing that little bit of your book with us.
Thanks.
Okay. I have some questions for you. My first is, how does it feel to have your debut book out?
It feels very good. It feels it's a relief. There's, especially near the end there, when you're just getting ready for it to actually come out into the world, there was certainly a lot of pre-publication anxieties. So yeah, it feels good to kind of take a deep breath and just have it out there. And who it finds and who finds it is kind of up to the universe at this point, and maybe some marketing.
Congratulations on your publication. Let's see. So my first generic question was, what inspired you to write this book? But in talking to you beforehand, so it turns out you're an art journalist. And so I'm wondering, your protagonist is a collage artist. Did anything from your career as an art journalist influence the book?
Maybe a little bit, maybe some of the details for sure. But as far as the collage art itself, there wasn't like a particular artist I came across that kind of inspired the character. It was already kind of brewing. Ford was originally a used car salesman. It was a totally different, it was a short story, and it transformed a lot, but he was a used car salesman and he wasn't very good at it. And he wasn't very interesting because he was just kind of the sad sack. And I came to realize, like, this guy's got to have something going for him. Otherwise, who wants to follow this man around? So yeah, the art thing then also thematically kind of started, you know, it's weird when you go through the writing process, but eventually somehow arts and Ford connected and everything kind of started gelling after many, many drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could you tell me what, could you go a little bit more into what the writing process was like for this?
Yeah, so it started as a short story in graduate school. I was working on another novel, and I was taking a class with Robert Boswell, who's a fantastic author, writer, and teacher. And he's got a cool process for, I mean, this was a forms class specifically, so each week he'd give us like a 500-word assignment, and the first part was just like, pick something that happened in your life. And that was it. Just like sit down with your life and think about it. And that's how it kind of started in the used car lot world, because I used to be an office assistant at a used car lot. And we had this really interesting mailman whose wife would follow him when he came to deliver the mail every day, but nobody knew why. They were like, watch the mailman, watch. And then this, I think it was a maroon Taurus would pull up, and we just assumed it was his wife, but the woman would just be sitting in there staring at, watching him enter and leave. And then when his truck pulled out, she followed. So I tried to explore that in the short story, and that was kind of like, it kind of set the tone, because the book itself has a lot of just these weird behaviors and kind of obsessions, and that set the tone. There's no mailman in the story. There's no wife following him around, but that's how it started. And then Boswell, my professor, just mentioned how he didn't think the two main characters, which were actually Ford and Grace, were done seeing each other. Like, they weren't done with each other yet. They were much younger in the short story. I eventually aged them, and the dynamic between Ford and his son used to be between Ford and his brother, but as they aged, I thought the tension was better with the father-son dynamic as opposed to a brother-brother dynamic. And then, as I mentioned, like, Ford's career changed. He was a little more in control of his life, whereas before, well, certain aspects of his life, whereas before he was kind of just this floating, helpless creature that had nothing going for him. So the art kind of stabilized them, and that's really kind of, I mean, the art is kind of crucial for the story here. And yeah, it went through a lot of drafts. It was a first person up for a while. But some astute readers were telling me that this guy could never tell the story that you're telling. And I eventually was like, you're right, this guy would never tell this story. And so it shifted into a close third, and that kind of opened things up as well.
While writing the story, were there any challenges that you ran across that you really didn't expect?
Not anything out of the usual. I mean, I put it down for a while. I mean, getting it published was a challenge. I put it down for probably over a year, and I kind of forgot that I'd submitted it to some small presses, and then Unsolicited came knocking on the door asking if it was still available. And by that point, I was working on a new project, and I was happy with The Wind Under the Door. I don't even know if that was the title at that point, but I was kind of expecting disappointment. So I didn't necessarily want to get too invested in like, okay, like here's the novel, I hope you like it. I was just like, I don't even know what draft you guys have. Like, so I can't even tell you what I should send. And they're like, just send like the one you're happy with. And I'm like, I don't even know what that one is because there's a bunch in this folder and I can't recall. So that was pretty tricky. And then kind of just, I think, you know, as a writer, you get used to rejection. So once it was accepted, that was kind of hard to actually fathom and really trust. I was like, what's wrong with these people? I eventually trusted it.
How was working with Unsolicited from that point? I imagine you went into like the editing process.
Yeah, there was some edits. It was actually a really weird. I had a weird experience, and this is gonna be. It's a little strange, but there were 2 passages in the novel. There's a lot of jumping in time, going back and forth, and there were some transitions that I wasn't completely confident about were working correctly. And so Unsolicited gives you, like, they gave me a month or 2 to like go through the novel before I officially submitted it, make it, shape it the way I wanted it, and then we'd get into the editing process. So I did that. It was really long, it's like intense period. And then I sent it, and then there was a couple of months in between. And then when they got it back to me, I just remember I was like going through it, and I saw their edits were like in the red, but then there were these new passages, and they were at the moments that I was most interested. I was like, I want to see if they do anything with these, if they're able to help me like shape it maybe. And then the passages came, and I was reading it, and I was like, holy shit, like what they did is working here. This works. It's like, it's awesome. This is great. And I remember stepping outside. This is where I write. So I stepped outside this room, and I was like, holy shit, they did it. Like, this is working. Like they did magic just with a couple of extra notes of dialogue. And then once I resubmitted it, because we went through a couple rounds of edits, I went back to the older version because I wanted to see like, what did they do? Like, how did they do that? So I wanted to check what I had submitted prior. And then I realized I had done that in the previous round when I submitted it, but I forgot I did that. I completely forgot. So then when I realized it was me who had done that, because it had been a couple months, I was devastated because I didn't trust my own, you know, like I was like, so then I like went back outside, and my wife was like, what's wrong? I'm like, I thought they did that. I did that. And she's like, so what's the problem? And I'm like, now I just don't know if I trust it. And she's like, what do you mean? You were happy like a week ago. I was like, I know, but that's when I thought they did it. And she's like, you're not right. And I was like, probably not. But yeah, so that was kind of part of the process. I know I drove them a little crazy over there because I did some tweaks, some last minute tweaks, and I shaved off a bunch in the opening chapter, but they're totally flexible and totally cool. And I kind of redid a minor character, kind of reinvented her entire personality, just because it wasn't working after the second or third read through. You know, after those, because we went, I think it was like 2 or 3 rounds, but yeah, so it was good. There's a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility.
That's great. I mean, I think you're the first writer to admit to forgetting what they wrote.
Yeah.
You know how you reread your older work and you're like, this is really good. Who wrote this?
Well, it almost sounds arrogant to say that, like, oh my gosh, it was so good. But like, I genuinely thought somebody else had kind of added. And it was just like a couple of bits of dialogue that just made the transition work. But yeah, I totally forgot.
You got to give credit where credit's due, and that's you. All right. I'm going to open this up to audience question and answers. If anybody wants to, you press the hand button at the bottom, or just unmute yourself and go. Either way. Near asks, is the name Ford a leftover from the used car version?
Actually, in the short story, his name was Clay. Because the forms class I was taking, one of the weeks, Boz was saying how, like, first you pick your own life story, but then he wanted you to pull from, you know, like an ancient tale, a biblical tale, Greek mythology, and I picked Cain and Abel. And so I had the brother's name was Bailey, which is the son's name still. But I wanted, for some reason, Clay and Cain to me worked. Wait, Cain killed Abel. Yeah, so Cain. Okay. Not that there's any killing in this book, but that was the dynamic at that time. So he was Clay, but then I had a lot of the cars were really significant in the used car lot story, the types of cars. And then for this story, cars kind of play a role as well. So I did want him to have I wanted him to have a car name after I got him out of the car lot, which is weird. But yeah, I wanted him to have maybe not a car name, but I found that Ford worked for what I was trying to do with this character.
I mean, at least his name wasn't like Toyota or something.
Yeah. Accord.
Let's see. Vanessa asks, what was your process for weaving in specific songs into your story?
First, it started thematically, like the suburbs. Arcade Fire is a suburb. So Ford's a collage artist, and he usually interprets a single song for his client. Like a client will come to him with a song that they want interpreted, and he'll interpret it. But for his son's birthday, he's trying to, sorry, the screen just did something weird. He's trying to interpret the entire Suburbs album of Arcade Fire. So that was intentional just thematically because the Suburbs hits on a lot of, there's a lot of parallels between that and the story. Sense of loss, sense of nostalgia, sense of a lost sense of nostalgia. And then the other songs kind of that get mentioned briefly or in certain scenes just seem to resonate. I mentioned this in a previous chat. I'm a huge Sopranos fan, and like David Chase does really awesome things with music, where it adds, you know, it's not, he never does something where it's just simply announcing or narrating what's going on in the scene. Like, you know, like badass guy walks down the road. Like he's using lyrics that are adding to it, in a way that's kind of just, I don't know, it just adds a layer and it tells a little more maybe at times. And I was trying to do that for certain scenes and certain songs. So like Springsteen's State Trooper comes to mind for chapter 4, because that's a really late night chapter, kind of isolated and alone, Ford is. And that song is kind of just about isolation. I mean, it's just a single guitar, as most of that record is. But then that howl that Springsteen does kind of captured this internal rage that Ford has. So basically, I was just trying to steal David Chase without the benefit of having music actually playing, because it's not a film, it's a book. But I was thinking about that on some level, for sure.
You listen to any music while you wrote?
No, I can't do that. I have a hard time. I need kind of silence. If anything, I would listen to like white noise or maybe classical music. But I can't listen to stuff with lyrics and singing because I end up listening to the lyrics. And then what's interesting is just like, I mean, maybe not interesting, but you know, like, so there's 2 main art projects for Ford in this novel. His son's his interpretation of the suburbs for his son, and then he's interpreting a song for Grace, the woman he's having an affair with. And that one's a fictional band, White Elephant, and he's supposed to interpret this one song, but he can't understand what the guy is singing because there's so much reverb. And the band isn't big enough to have like their lyrics online or anything. So he has no idea. He lied to her, pretending that he was like really into this band because he wanted her to think that he was, you know, hip, I guess. But eventually he realizes that this 5-track album is like an homage to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. So each song is each section of that poem, and the lyrics are pulled from each of those sections, not in any sort of like, it's not in the same, they're not pulling like full, you know, passages. But that was fun to do, and thematically it worked really nice because you kind of have this tension between the suburbs of, like, you know, Ford's kid is kind of represented by the suburbs, and then the wasteland is kind of represented by like what Ford has been doing for the last 10 years and kind of continuing to do. So that was really fun to kind of explore, and it's fun to make up a band too. And you know, I intentionally did not include the band The Walkmen in this book because that's my favorite band, and I think anyone who knows me who read the book and saw that would kind of just be pulled out of the book and think, of course he did that. So I avoided The Walkmen, even though I would have loved to have had them on every page.
You'll put them in the next book.
Yeah.
Sarah asks, the book is set in your hometown. Did you ever consider setting the story outside of Gainesville and Asheville?
No. No, because it started as a short story in Asheville, and that was when I was living in Houston, going to grad school. So it didn't feel weird. I think if I started it in Asheville, I might have had more reservations about writing about Asheville, but since I was away from Asheville, I didn't have any strange feelings. And I just like the dynamic because there's so many Floridian. My parents grew up in Asheville, but I grew up in South Florida. I went to school in Gainesville for college. But there's so many Floridians who come up to Asheville and live here, transplants. And you hear a lot of folks, they kind of like view Asheville as this one thing. It's like this, I don't know, this holy place where, you know, it's the mountains and you're away from the flatlands and it just seems so different and magical. And then when you live here long enough, it starts chipping away and you start realizing it's just like any other place. It's got its problems, much lower wages than anywhere in South Florida, probably high cost of living. And I kind of like the idea of Ford. I mean, Ford has many reasons he moves up to Asheville that kind of reveal themselves in the novel. But yeah, I like the idea of having his son and ex-wife ultimately moved to California. So I also wanted them to constantly be getting further and further away to kind of just really represent this, you know, this huge space between them, both, you know, figuratively and literally. And yeah, and at one point Asheville was kind of like Ford in the short story was moving to Asheville as kind of a punishment. I mean, it was a totally different story, but he was moving to basically put himself in exile from the ocean. He didn't want to be around the ocean for something that he'd done. So that kind of also played in, ultimately changed as the story changed, but still kind of fits in a weird way. And then Grace is coming from Houston, which I'm obviously also familiar with. But it was important for Ford and Grace to also have kind of a similar, like Houston and South Florida have similar vibes and geography and stuff.
Would you say that this book could only be set in Asheville?
If not, I think it would need to be, like when I was in Houston, I learned there's a connection between Houston and Colorado. That's kind of like Houstonians, Asheville, it seems like. I taught at a lot of schools for a nonprofit, and all the kids, and it was usually wealthy schools. So all the kids would go up to Colorado. I don't know if it was Aspen or Boulder. I don't know where it was, but they're all going to Colorado. And I was like, why Colorado? They're like, cause that's where we ski and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's cool for like spring break. And I kind of feel like there's a similar like draw to, you know, it's similar distance. And I feel like Flatlanders always go. So I'm saying like, yeah, it could have, like if I was more familiar with Colorado, maybe it could have worked there. Cause I don't think Asheville, as unique as my city likes to think it is, I think there are plenty of other Asheville's here in America and elsewhere that could have worked if I was more familiar. But there was something nice about, you know, knowing the location and feeling confident about the way I was portraying it and stuff.
Right on. Let's see. Any other questions by people? Let's see. Da-da-da-da. Calamity asks, how was it writing about fatherhood before and after becoming a father in real life?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there are certain passages that certainly hit me a little harder when I read it after experiencing, I have a 2-year-old daughter. After, you know, actually having that connection with the child and just imagine, like, you know, putting myself in that situation. It's obviously a very dysfunctional relationship that Ford has with his son Bailey. So imagining that and the things that occur in the book definitely, in some passages, certainly hit heavier after, especially, and it's strange too. I mean, after my daughter like really like hit the 1.5 mark or something, because you know when they're first born, they're cute and adorable, but they're not really people. They're just blobs. But once like her personality really started taking shape, like imagining who she could be with that personality later in life, and you know, imagining myself in the situation where like I didn't have a relationship with her was like, yeah, that would be heartbreaking. But it didn't necessarily change. You know, I didn't want to soften the story or anything. I had the story how I wanted it to be, so it remained for the most part. I mean, it remained.
Let's see. Any other questions before we wrap up? Going once, going twice. Oh, somebody said yes. Calamity said yes.
Okay.
We're all on the edge of our seats, Calamity. I'm wondering about why surfing? Calamity asks, why surfing?
Yeah, why surfing? Well, I needed this. I feel like you write about surfing a lot. Calamity knows me. I needed Bailey, the son, to have to be involved in a physical. I wanted him to be involved in a sport that required physical, you know, activity, athleticism, and also just, I mean, the ocean terrifies me personally, and I've surfed once in my life. I love the ocean when I'm in it, but I'm also always afraid. You know, you got that Jaws just wondering what's underneath you. So I kind of admire surfers because I would never go out in the ocean that far out alone on a board that could be misinterpreted as a seal. So I just think there's something cool about people who are so fearless in the face of truly the unknown when they go out there. There's something admirable about that. And I don't know, there's something about like surfers also like walking on water in a way. And there's just something magical and, I don't know, cool about surfers that I don't have. So I wanted to explore it. Plus I grew up in Florida.
My next question is, what are you working on now?
Well, I've put it down, but I'm going to get back to it soon, hopefully. But I was about 30,000 words into a novel taking place in the 30s in Asheville. And it's a larger cast. I mean, I guess it's the same number, not the same number, but the similar amount of characters, but it's shifting perspective, close third. So it's fun to get into, you know, like this one's a close third and you're kind of always with Ford, except when other characters are kind of telling their stories. But this one really opens up and allows the readers to get into different characters' heads and space, and I'm looking forward. And like something about, I mean, I wrote a history column here in Asheville. The pandemic screwed that up, but yeah, there's something fun about researching and kind of getting into a different world that's still very similar. So that's what I'm working on, or will be getting back to working on soon.
That's great. When do you think we can expect it?
2030. I don't know. 2025 is my goal, I think. Because, I mean, yeah, realistically, maybe 2024. It'll be done before then, but the whole process of things coming. Yeah.
All right. Thomas, it was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I will get this up on the YouTubes, hopefully by tomorrow. I'll share after that.
Thank you so much, Jonah.
Yeah, thank you. Any last remarks?
Sorry, I was reading what people were saying.
You're fine, don't worry.
Thanks, everybody who came out. Thanks again for hosting. This was a lot of fun. And I hope everybody stays safe and wear your mask, social distance.
We're trying our best.
Yeah.
All right.
We're going to make it.
I am going to press the